Here we go again. This is our third question and answer session. The first was when Telford and Rekin was about to enter Tier 2 of COVID restrictions. A few days later, we did it again as we were about to enter Lockdown 2.0. And now it's Tier 2, Take 2. But this one is different to the earlier Tier 2. Pubs that don't do food can't open, or depends on who you want to believe, depends on the size of their Scotch eggs, doesn't it? So to discuss COVID matters and so much more, first of all, my name is Chris Kowalik, and I'm joined by our panel, who tonight are Liz Noakes, Telford and Wrekin Council's Director of Public Health, joined by Nikki Minshall, whose background is in public protection and enforcement, and who is now working in the Health Protection Hub, and Sophie Lane, Revenue Service Delivery Manager, and Councillor Shaun Davies, Leader of Telford and Wrekin Council. Good evening to you all, and Councillor Davies, I'll begin with you with the big news of the day today. Debenhams going into liquidation, a big name taking up a big space in Telford Town Centre, and it's going to be leaving a big gap.
Well, this is heartbreaking news for the staff affected, of course, and also for the supply chain of Debenhams. And we stand ready as a council to support that workforce in very tangible and practical ways through our job box programme, which details are online, and our colleagues will be on Radio Shropshire tomorrow just after 9 to talk about that offer. Of course, there are other retail businesses in the news right now for all the wrong reasons, but we stand ready as much as we can to support those retail workers ahead of Christmas, and also we stand ready to work with the shopping centre owners to understand how we can support them too.
What's it mean for the economy of the town centre, a big name like that going?
Well, of course, it's bad news. It's on a human level. It's lots of people out of work, around 15,000 across the country. Obviously, hundreds of people here in Telford and Wrekin relying upon direct employment or employment through the supply chain, and also it means less footfall, of course, for the shopping centre. But that said, our shopping centre is a regional attraction. It has seen big names leave the high street before, and it has a plan to bounce back, and we stand ready as a council to support that in any way that we can.
And as Shaun mentioned, the Job Box service from Telford and Wrekin Council and careers advisor Richard Shaw from the Job Box service will be on BBC Radio Shropshire just after their 9 o'clock news tomorrow morning. That's Richard Shaw with advice for people affected by the liquidation of Debenhams and indeed anybody else in a similar situation. That's what they're there for, just after 9 o'clock on Radio Shropshire. So over the last day or so, we've received a lot of questions from yourselves, and thank you for all of those. And that was in response to the posts on Facebook asking for questions. And on your behalf, I'll be asking those to our panel. And please do continue to put your questions in the comments under the video post on Facebook. We're also live and on demand on our YouTube channel, and that channel being youtube.com/Telford Wrekin. There's also a raft of constantly updated information that you can access from the council by visiting telford.gov.uk/coronavirus and telford.gov.uk/public protection. These pages are updated constantly as government guidelines and regulations are updated. And if you want to report a COVID concern, or if you're a business that needs advice, then email us at coronavirus@telford.gov.uk. And if it's health related, for example, maybe it's something to do with testing, then email healthprotectionhub@telford.gov.uk. Lots of places to go, lots of sources of information, and I'll repeat those details later on. So let's go into the questions, and we'll start off on COVID. Although the pre-submitted questions, we've had far more questions on other matters, but we'll start off with COVID, move to those other matters, and come back to COVID again. So let's start off a question for you, Shaun. Thank you for the business grants given in the current lockdown. Will licensed premises who are unable to offer a substantial meal be eligible for a further business support grant from the council when we go into Tier 2 from tomorrow?
Well, thanks, Chris. I'll ask Sophie to join me on this question in a moment or two, but this is really hot off the press from the House of Commons this evening, where the government has announced a package which is around £1,000 per wet pub. So just to be clear about what the definition is, it's pubs who can't or don't serve food with their alcohol. Now, always the devil is in the detail, waiting for that guidance to come through in terms of how that's going to be spent, what conditions and criteria is attached. But the moment we've got that, the moment we're able to know if we're the administering authority, we'll get that information out to those pubs affected. I think it's also worth noting that, of course, if you are serving food or a substantial meal, whether that be a Scotch egg or something else, then you won't qualify for this support, is my understanding. But we'll wait and see for that detail. I don't know if Sophie wants to add anything as our revenue manager.
Yeah, the one thing I would add to that is that the government have said today that the area of pubs is extremely complex and complicated, and they are working on the guidance as we speak. We had a further clarification from the government in terms of guidance within the last 24 hours, and they are issuing further guidance within the next 24 hours across the board in terms of what grants are going to be available to businesses within that area. When we go into tier 2, and pubs will fall into that. So we will update our website as soon as we've got the detail.
What about guidance on whether pubs fall into that category or not, and therefore whether they can open or not? I guess George Eustace threw a bit of a curveball by saying a Scotch egg is a substantial meal, but that wasn't our understanding, though, was it?
Well, the issue of substantial meal is a term in licensing law, which is well established within the pub trade. So that's where those words come from. But you're right, Chris, to identify there isn't any real definition at the moment coming from government about what it means, whether a plate of chips would suffice, or whether or not you need what makes up a substantial meal. So as Sophie quite rightly says, we're waiting for the guidance. The moment we've got that guidance, the moment we can launch our scheme here in Telford Wrekin, we will. We're one of the best performing councils in the country in terms of getting our grants out the door, and there's no reason why we won't be one of the best performing councils to do it on this grant scheme. But that said, I just urge publicans to just understand that we are waiting for the information from the government. And one of the things I've learned since March of this year is there's a huge gulf between press announcements and announcements in the House of Commons and actually the detail and the money getting to local councils so we can get them out the door. So, but the moment we have got that information, of course we will.
Moving on to other forms of business support, a question regarding Ironbridge being decimated in 2020 by, first of all, the flooding, and don't we remember that, and COVID now. Why not give them a helping hand by doing free park and ride through next year, once, of course, the testing station there is wound up, and give them a chance to make up lost earnings?
Absolutely. Well, I'm really sympathetic to what's happening in Ironbridge. I spent a lot of time, as many will remember, down in Ironbridge with our colleagues from the Blue Light Services, supporting residents and businesses affected by the floods. There's 2 or 3 things we've done here. We've introduced free parking in Ironbridge. That's helped hugely. I'm working with Caroline Healy, the local councillor, to understand what more we can do. The free park and ride is something we can look at, and we will look at. Obviously, as the questioner quite rightly points out, the centre at the moment is being used for a testing centre. That's going to be there certainly in the medium term. But understanding how we can support businesses, we're also helping businesses revitalise and diversify. So there's grants for businesses. Is going to cash grants going to businesses to do the things with their businesses. We're using money to help empty shops reopen. So there's a huge amount of support that we're putting in place, not just in Ironbridge, but also right across Telford Wrekin, and we'll continue to do that. And I don't rule out the park and ride suggestion, as the questioner asks.
We just have to wait for the testing centre to go. All of that issue be sorted first, and then make that decision.
Yeah, or we may find an alternative location for the park and ride to operate from. Of course, what we've got now is a number of sites in that area. Of course, Legs Way in Madeley, just up the bank from Ironbridge. That's also now a walk-in testing centre. So our options are limited at the moment, but we're looking forward. We're looking ahead to 2021, and everything we can do to help the economy get back on its feet, we will. But can I just say, go and spend local, walk into Ironbridge or into any of our high streets. We've got free parking, as I've said. Spend money local. It's a fantastic, almost unique proposition that we have here in Telford Wrekin around free parking, not just as a special offer, but all year round in most of our district centres.
And it's free parking in Ironbridge until the end of the year.
Absolutely.
So then, staying on the subject of parking around the Rekin. When are you going to get rid of the pointless, says the questioner, the pointless and dangerous one-way system at the bottom of the Rekin? That's part of the parking scenario, and there's another question on parking to come.
What we've seen over recent months is a huge uptake in the Rekin for walking, for cycling, for running, and so on. And I think the Rekin has never been so popular than it has over the last few months, and that's really seen a huge pressure on the local car parking. And it's really important to say that the council doesn't own any of the parking around the Rekin, and that's really, really important because we the ability to control parking therefore is somewhat limited. And we also do get a huge amount of complaints from residents around that area, but also other visitors around illegal parking. And we've been taking some robust action with our enforcement officers to tackle illegal parking. But what I think there needs to be is a broader solution centered around all the landowners who own the land around the Rekin to come together with the council to understand what are the options. So, for example, is there a position whereby we can get a free park and ride, for example, from Wellington or from a local business in the area to shuttle people from Wellington to the Rekin? People can leave their cars in the free car parks, hopefully spend some money in Wellington before and after their visit. Is there a way in which we can help people make it more healthy ways in which to get to the Rekin? So, for example, walking, cycling, running. In terms of the one-way system, that is something we're trialing at the moment, just to try and improve the area and improve the congestion around the Rekin. And it's something we will keep under constant review. We have listened to a number of residents' concerns. We've tweaked the solution there, but we'll continue to do that. But it's all about how do you get people, so many more people using the Rekin in a safe way, and maybe try and lessen the role of the car to get people to the Rekin.
The next question was, when will the council create more parking at the Rekin? But as you're suggesting, the creation of parking spaces will be maybe in Wellington and get people up to the Rekin some other way.
Yeah, and also working with the current landowners and the businesses around the Rekin about understanding what capacity they can offer under what circumstances. I think it's a fantastic attraction. I've gone to the, obviously as a local person, go to the Rekin quite a lot. I understand the frustration, but there is just a huge amount of demand for very little space, unfortunately, and we've got to make sure that the space that is available is being used safely, and also try and work out ways in which we can help people do the right thing, as I say, using park and rides, cycling, walking, and so on.
Staying with parking, moving to Sturchley, the questioner asks, when is the parking around Sturchley going to get sorted with people double parking on the grass? There are no parking spaces left, and so many people have more than one car per family. Why can't they do in Sturchley what they did on Woodside?
Okay, so the answer is absolutely, completely agree with the issue here. Most people now have got 2 cars or even more than 2 cars per household. Our estates here in Telford built roughly the same time when maybe 1 in 2 or 1 in 3 houses had a car, and therefore there's a huge amount of pressure on the infrastructure. We spent over £1.5 million on creating more car park spaces in our estates. We're going to be spending more money over the next 2 financial years. I'll make sure that I work with Nathan England, Vanessa Holt and Chris Turley, the local councillors in Sturchley, to identify what other options are available. But the simple answer is, of course, that people shouldn't be illegally parking, and we will take action against them using our enforcement officers and work out ways in which we can increase capacity. But it is a difficult one, as I say. More and more people have got cars, unfortunately. And one of the things about the last 6 or 7 months, I think, is because people aren't necessarily going to work in their car, you're not getting that churn of vehicles coming in and out. What you're seeing is people staying at home, and therefore the cars outside on the road or in the locality for all day, 5 days a week, and maybe only being used at weekends. So we're seeing a huge amount of pressure around that too.
A very local question. When are you going to finish the car parking problem at the bottom of Brands Farm Way? Been promised for the last 5 years and nothing.
Okay, well, I haven't got a specific answer to Brands Farm Way. However, what I will say is I will look to work with the local councillors in the area to understand the issues. As I say, there is more money going into this area than ever before. Over £1.5 million already allocated. By 2024, we would have spent another £2.5 million in total. So let me look at Brands Farm Way in particular, and I'll come back to the residents of Brands Farms Way together with the local councillors in that area.
Then moving on to public transport, what plans have the council got to improve public transport around Telford and Wrekin? More bus routes, they ask, real-time information at bus stops, shuttle bus to the Wrekin, there's an idea, and perhaps a new look at the Telford public transport plan.
Well, firstly, a lot of the ideas there that are listed are things we are actively taking forward as a council, working in partnership with Arriva. So, for example, the display travel displays at the bus stops, that's something we're looking at and supporting. We're looking also at ways in which we can increase the on-demand function of public transport and buses. Clearly, we're not London, so one of the things that people don't always appreciate is that Arriva is a private company that operate the buses here in Telford and Wrekin, and we've got a good partnership with Arriva, but they are a private company. They're here to make profits ultimately, and our control over the bus network therefore is quite limited, but that we do work with Arriva to understand the areas of demand. I think the shuttle bus idea of the Rekin is something that I personally support and want to see developed over the next few months. Also, at the moment, and I know it's the C word again, COVID, but there is a huge amount of pressure on the capacity at the moment because on a lot of the busy routes, Arriva are operating 2 buses, where they used to only operate 1. So we need to sit down once we get into 2021 and work out what the options are. And of course, if you get any ideas, then please do feed that into us as a council.
And just adding a comment to the parking at the Rekin, bike locking stations at the bottom of the Rekin would be a help, is one comment that's just come in. And Sean, you've just taken up cycling.
Yeah, so I think one of the things we are absolutely doing is installing many more of those facilities right across Telford and Rekin. And of course, I go back to, and I know I sound like droning on, but the Rekin is a privately owned facility, and all that land is also privately owned. So we always have to seek landowner consent, which takes time. But absolutely, the idea of having the facilities for bikes to be locked up safely is something we definitely we should look at.
We've had some questions in relation to public sector pay being frozen. An interesting one for us to be discussing, obviously a bunch of public sector workers on a public sector channel. The question is, the economy is at an all-time low. Council workers who earn more than £24,000 per annum are having their pay frozen. What are your views, Sean, on this, taking into account that MPs' salaries are always exempt from pay freezes, they say?
Right, so the first thing I would say is the government have set out their plans for a public sector freeze in a way that's been described in the question. So for all those public sector workers who earn below £24,000, they would have a pay freeze. For those public sector workers who earn less than £24,000, they would receive a fixed £250 pay rise. But when you take inflation into effect and tax changes, that actually is a real terms cut to public sector workers. And what I would say is that, I find it very difficult that the people who decided to go onto the doorsteps and clap key sector workers and public sector workers, whether that be council workers or firefighters or soldiers or police officers, are now saying that their pay should be frozen. And I think, of course, there is a balance between the economy and recovery of the economy, but there is also a direct impact on public sector workers having less money in their pockets and therefore less money to go and spend in the economy. So I think it is a balance. Can I just say, though, and again, sorry to be boring, but there's a technical difference in that local government do set their own pay. There's a national regime that's in place. So the government has stated their aim, but it is up to local government through the Local Government Association, working with our unions and other public bodies to decide how and if and under what level any pay rise would be. And that will take place over the next couple of months.
One of the other questions on the same subject was, will councillors' expenses and allowances be frozen in line with other public workers?
The vast majority of councillors here in Telford Wrekin don't claim any expenses at all, and I think that's really important to say, and that's all public record. You can have a look on the council's website. Over the last few years, the level of expenses are being paid, out of pocket expenses, has dropped by 90+%. So that's the first thing I would say. And myself, as a councillor, I've never claimed an out-of-pocket expense since I was elected in 2011. In terms of allowances, allowances aren't set by councillors. You'd be glad to know they're set by an independent body that have reported, and there is a linkage between what happens in the wider public sector to councillors' pay. So that links into the LGA work that will take place later on this year.
But there was a significant increase in allowances earlier this year, wasn't there, for Telford Wrekin members?
Yes, there was. That came after 11 years, apologies, of a freeze, and it was an independent process that came in to look at that question. And listen, I know it's not a very popular thing to talk about, but what I would say is that ultimately my strong view, and people can vote me out if they want to for having this view, is that if you don't pay councillors, then you will have a situation where only the rich people, or people who don't need to earn any money in order to work, get to become a councillor, or a lot of retired people that have private income that have the time to give. I work at this role pretty much full time now, as you'd expect me to. I do a job that I can honestly say I work hard on, and you know, ultimately I've got a family to bring up and pay for. If people want to come and do the role for free, then that's up to them. They can stand for election and get elected.
Final question on the subject of pay. Will MP salaries, and I guess the will is not in your gift, Councillor Davies, but will MP salaries be frozen?
So there's an independent process for MPs. I think there's a point around a 4 or 5% pay rise. Ultimately, it's up to MPs what they do with that increase, whether they accept it or not.
In the face of more government cuts to come, please promise, asks the questioner, to do all you can to not raise the council tax next year, as it's already the second biggest bill in their household. I guess it's one of the biggest bills in any household, isn't it?
Yes, it is, and I've got some real bad news for you. The spending review that took place last week by the Chancellor has set the assumption that council tax, including the adult social care precept, will be raised by up to 5%. And now there's a very clear issue there. You know, don't listen to me as a Labour council leader. Listen to the Conservative council leaders. Right at the start of this pandemic, we were told by the government to do all that it takes to support businesses, residents, and communities, and that's what we've done. That's cost Telford Wrekin Council something in the region of £24 million, and that's on top of all the other things that we spend money on. So, for example, adult social care, safeguarding of children, neighbourhood services, police enforcement, all the things that we talk about this evening cost money. Now, I don't expect any thanks at all for this next statement, but we have got the lowest council tax in the whole of the West Midlands, and we will always have, while I'm the leader of the council, amongst the lowest council tax in the West Midlands. That's my absolute promise and pledge. And I also say to the resident that I pay council tax here in Telford and Rekin, and I know, therefore, the cost of the pressures of council tax, and we'll do all that we can to minimise it. But when the system is being stacked, which means that you either put the council tax up by the prescribed limit that the government tell you to, or you have to make cuts, then unfortunately that does mean that council tax will have to go up. We're going to work through the detail, the small print, to understand what more we can do to help protect people on council tax support on low incomes, but it is a really, really difficult one. And let me also just say, Chris, that actually, even if we put the council tax up by 5% at the moment, that would still see further cuts next year on top of the £115 million worth of cuts we've had to make since 2010.
So actually talking about the money, the last time we spoke a month ago, you were talking about the, what was it, £11.7 million that the council needed to balance between now and the end of the financial year, before the end of March. How's it looking now?
Well, we're closing that gap all of the time using efficiencies, using the income that we drive up as a local authority. And there has been some more money coming from government, thankfully. We're lobbying hard for that, but there is still a gap. And we're going into the next financial year with a gap of around £6 million that we need to find those savings. And that means cuts to services, unfortunately. And, you know, adult social care is and safeguarding of children is a key priority. And we're also looking at other pressures, aren't we? So, for example, we've spoke right at the beginning of this around businesses going out of business, people needing that support to get back into the labour market. Of course, we're seeing businesses speaking to us as their landlord, wanting further flexibilities. There are pressures around, for example, the rollout of the mass testing and vaccinations that we're being asked to perform. So there's a huge amount of pressures without a huge amount of income coming in.
So you've listed the areas where there are the pressures, the areas to continue. What would have to give?
Well, we've always tried to, since 2011, protect the frontline service, and that's what we'll try and do. We've also, since 2011, looked at ways in which we can raise our own income, so that we are reducing our dependency upon government debt, and we'll continue to do a mixture of those things, as well as being trying to be more efficient as an organisation.
So Band D is the average banding for council tax in Telford and Rekin. If it's a 5% increase, what might that bring it to? Have we done the number crunching?
Well, it'll depend on which area of the council area you live in. The council tax, by the way, is made up of a number of factors. So, for example, the Police and Crime Commissioner levies an amount of money upon each property in Telford and Wrekin. The Fire Authority also levies money against the council tax, as does your local parish and town council, together with the borough council. So it's not a straightforward answer to that question, Chris, of course, but roughly speaking, the Telford and Wrekin Council element would go up by 5% if these proposals go through.
Right, on to other subjects then, to the elections. Elections in May 2021, although the main council election won't be for another, what, 2.5 years?
Yeah, so our elections don't take place until May 2023, but we have got 2 by-elections in May in Dorian Aqueduct and Donington.
And the questioner is asking, will those elections all be postal votes like some other neighbouring authorities, they ask?
Well, there's no plans, as I understand it, for all-out postal elections. It is something the government have thought about, but I don't think the government have made any decisions on that. That would not be a decision for us as a local council. And of course, if that was the decision, then we'd be writing to all those people who have an opportunity to vote. I know there's a number of other by-elections at parish and town council level too, so we'd have to wait and see. I think what we do need to do is see a widening of opportunity to vote. Clearly, people will be concerned in May about going to the local polling station. And that is something that is a point I'm making to members of Parliament locally and also to the government directly.
A variety of other subjects being asked questions on. One is on broadband, and we were just a couple of minutes late coming on because of some broadband problems. But when will we get fibre broadband, asks this person. We're the only street without it. Very frustrating, they say, but they haven't said where they live.
Okay, if that person would like to contact me so we can have a look. As a council, we spent quite significant sums of money with BT to roll out better broadband across Telford and Rekin. We've got something like 98% coverage of that programme. But if you're not in that 98%, I can understand the frustration. But if you could let us know where you are, and I'll ask our team there to contact you and to work with you. Of course, as a council, we don't provide internet ourselves. It's a private sector venture, but we'll do what we can to support you.
The next questioner saw Countryfile on Sunday night, as did I. Anybody else
Yes.
on the panel? I can see heads nodding. Sean's there, Nikki Minchell did, Liz Noakes did, and they launched Plant Britain. It's also National Tree Week this week. Is the council going to get involved with this scheme, they ask?
Yes, we are. So we've just launched over the last couple of days or so the Trees for TW, Trees for Telford and Rekin campaign, and this will give away almost 10,000 free trees to local residents, schools, landowners to plant in their gardens and their land, so that we can look to fight against climate change. We've had nearly 1,000 applicants for trees already, and we're really keen to roll this out further. Carolyn Healy, cabinet member for Green Space, is working really hard on this agenda. This is one initiative. There's other initiatives coming down the track as well in terms of trying to increase our trees. We got almost well over 3 million trees in Telford Wrekin as well. So we serve a good green network, and we want to improve and enhance that so that people can enjoy that for generations to come.
And if anybody wants a free tree, how do they go about getting it?
Well, the link's going to be put into the chat, I understand, but also you can look on the council website where that information is readily available.
Okay, well, we'll dig that up. We'll get that out in just a second. Then on to a very, very different and very specific subject, the Gower. The questioner wants information on the procurement for the £38,000 roof and also the £650,000 Pride in Your Community. And my screen has just gone blank. So Sean, take over if you can answer that question. They want to know what happened to the money.
Yeah, so the £650,000 sum of money, which is the Telford Wrekin Council's pot of money for the Gower project, is still there. It's still available. It's still being used, and it will be for until while that money is needed, and it will be allocated on need in the St George's area. I'm working very closely with Richard Overton and David Wright, the two local councillors for St George's, to bring forward the Gower, working with the parish council there too, to work to save and reopen that facility. There's been a number of avenues over the last few years that we've travelled together with residents groups to try and bring back the Gower for community use. There is a challenge. There's been external consultants brought in, and they've unfortunately failed to deliver any sizable money for the project. And we've now got a plan that the parish council is working with us, which will see the reopening of the Gower for a mixed-use development, community space. Hopefully, the parish council being cited there, that will free up space at the St George's School, which will provide much-needed school places in St George's, and also a much-needed accommodation in that area as well, whilst keeping the fabric of that building going. In terms of the roof, I'm not quite sure what the questioner is asking, but the roof was repaired a few years ago, and clearly that's going to be really important, isn't it? That building it had that new roof so that it can weather the bad storms over the last few years. But I'm really excited at the project coming forward. The residents, the parish council, the two ward members, the school, all working together positively to come up with a solution for a difficult question, which is how do we bring forward the Gower in a timely way. Too many people, in my view, have had an opportunity at a great expense to secure funding for that project, and they've unfortunately failed to do so. It's now time that we show the leadership as a borough council to get that building reopened for our community.
Just going back a point to the question about how to get your free tree, if you take a visit to the website, which is the www.sustainabletelfordandrekin.co.uk, and the and is AND, that's sustainabletelfordandrekin.co.uk, and then navigate your way to the tree scheme that is going on over there. Will someone at the council sort out the shambles that is the Telford Tennis Centre? It's been shut since March. It's the only centre run by Greenwich Leisure Limited, and it hasn't reopened since the first lifting of the first lockdown in July. They could reopen as of tomorrow, says this questioner, under the new tier scheme, but they decided to stay shut. Since the council outsourced it over 5 years ago, it's been run into the ground. Please take it back into council control or let a local tennis club operate it. You used to offer it as a monthly package with a gym membership, and why not review that offer again? So two questions. First of all, it's the operation of the tennis centre, and then there's also the gym membership.
Yeah, okay, well, real fair question. And I know that so many people are passionate about tennis and that facility, and we're lucky to have that facility here. in the borough. The tennis centre was due to reopen during October half term, and we were really excited at that prospect, but of course then that wasn't possible due to the second national lockdown. We're now working with the company concerned about reopening the centre, and we're also looking at ways in which we can take that centre forward from April 2021. So yes, it is something on our radar. We do want to see it open, and we do want to see it thriving, and we do want to work with local tennis centres to understand how that offer can be better placed, together working with the GLL, who are the operators currently.
And they were also asking about the monthly package with a gym membership, make it monthly rather than presumably an annual thing.
Yeah, well, that will be a matter for the operating company to offer that. And again, I'm more than happy to feed those views into to them. I know also that prior to the tennis centre being managed by the Greenwich Leisure, that it did form part of our aspirations offer, and that's something, of course, that fell away when the centre went to a different management model. But we absolutely are committed to the centre. We want it to thrive. We want to work with local tennis groups and individuals to make sure it does thrive. And of course, we're in constant conversations with the company to make sure that it gets reopened as soon as it can. But equally, that we're looking at different ways in which we could do that potentially from April 2021.
On to the clearing of shrubs and bushes. Lots of residents are commenting on the way shrubs and bushes have been cut along Brunel Road and Church Road. They've been hacked at and the paths have not been cleared properly afterwards. They have never looked so bad, and lots of sharp cuttings left about on paths. Most people agree that this is making our area look a mess, and the pathways are dangerous from such sloppy work. Doesn't anyone check this work?
Well, firstly, I know this road very well. I live just around the corner, and I walk or run that way most weeks. So I agree that the standard of work doesn't sound like it's been appropriately done. I've asked for the contract manager at Ida Verde, our contractor, to inspect the area today or tomorrow, look at tidying up and understand why on earth the standard of work hasn't been done as well as it should have been done. I absolutely kind of say that it's a huge priority of mine as a local councillor, but also the council leader, to ensure that our neighbourhoods and our streets are looking as well as good as they can be all year round. And that standard which has been described there is clearly not acceptable.
Couple of last ones on individual matters. When will the redevelopment at Randle Centre be finished? We've waited 10 plus years already.
Yes, well, the Randle Centre is a difficult one, and if I had a magic wand to be able to wave, then I would. It is difficult. So there's been a number. The centre is owned privately. It was sold before my time as council leader, and there's been a number of owners, private owners of that land. We are in active conversations with that landowner on two counts. The first count is to try and help them bring that site to a sensible solution. There's been talk of extra care facilities, care villages, accommodation, and we're wanting to understand why that owner is not bringing the site forward for those purposes. But also, let me be very clear, we're having robust conversations with the landowner about ensuring that piece of land is maintained while it's not being in use. And because it's such a prominent location, it does really bring the area down. And again, Chris Turley, Nathan England, and Vanessa Holt working really well with me and my cabinet colleagues with officers here to work out a solution, and we'll keep on pushing as much as we can. I know it's a frustration. I've heard it myself from residents directly, and we'll continue to do our best. But of course, our powers are limited as a council, and whilst the landowner is actively looking at ways in which to bring that site forward, our options are very much limited.
And a final question on other matters for now, but do please keep them coming in, and we'll be turning to them after we've gone through the pre-submitted COVID questions. When will the clock on St Leonard's Church be repaired?
Well, I know this church very well. My son got christened there, and I know Dave, the church warden, very well. So I'll pick it with Dave. It isn't something that the council is responsible for, but I'll talk to the church warden to understand what the barriers are, and see how I can support them in getting those barriers removed so that the clock is working again. I was involved quite significantly in the lighting of the building. It's a shame, as you say, the clock is not working at the moment.
We've had a number of COVID questions pre-submitted. Thank you for those. Please do continue to pop your questions into the comments in the Facebook chat under the video post here. We're also live and on demand on YouTube, which is youtube.com/Telford Wrekin. We have a number of websites and a number of areas where there's a lot of information, and also where you can ask questions and get help from council officers. So if you need any information on anything to do with coronavirus, it's telford.gov.uk/coronavirus, but also take a look at the telford.gov.uk/public protection area. There's a coronavirus section there too. If you want to report a COVID concern, or if you're a business that needs some advice, then you can email the public protection team at coronavirus@telford.gov.uk. And if it's health related, then it's health protection hub at telford.gov.uk. And in addition to Shaun, who we've heard a lot of over the last 40 minutes or so, there are representatives from those two other areas of the council. And we've also got Sophie Lane with us as well from Revenues, the Revenue Service Delivery Manager. So hopefully we'll have more of a conversation between all of us from here on in. The government said that the transmission of COVID has gone down as a result of the national lockdown. Is that the feeling in Telford and Rekin?
Do you want me to answer that one, Chris, or Shaun?
So this is Liz Noakes, Director of Public Health. Liz.
Okay, so yes, the rates have declined in Telford and Wrekin. So our rates currently are just below 200 per 100,000. And back in the peak, back at about the 11th of November, I remember the day, our 7-day infection rate was about 377. So yes, they have declined, but what I would say is that the rate of decline is slowing, and therefore we do need to all continue to play our part to try and get these infection rates down as low as possible.
So in anyone's opinion, is the move to tier 2, and remember this tier 2 was different to the tier 2 of a month ago, is the move to tier 2 the right one?
Well, I think in terms of the tier 1 and tier 2, tier 3, I was on a call with the civil service from their health department, and then later on the same week, this is last week, with the local government secretary. And what was clear from them was that the government was taking a harsh and hard look. Those are their words: harsh and hard look in terms of the tiering approaches. So if you look at the country, there are only broadly two areas in tier 1. The vast majority of the country in tier 2, and then a large proportion are in tier 3. And so if you compare us on that basis, then of course tier 2 does look like the place where we should be. And actually there are tier 3 areas, Coventry, that have lower rates than us, and we're in tier 2. So there's not an exact science around this. I think one of the frustrations from residents is that the government aren't being transparent about what criteria they are using in order to tier areas, and also importantly what criteria they then use to exit areas. So how do you move down tiers? Because it's not just a per 100,000 number. There's a huge amount of other factors that are said to be in play. But what we do need to do is ensure that the most vulnerable people in our borough are protected, and we also need to ensure that the business cost to these measures is compensated. If you're in hospitality, if you're a pub or you're a restaurant owner right now, you don't really care if it's tier 2 or tier 3, frankly, because the impact upon your business is absolutely massive. Because in tier 3 you're closed, in tier 2 you can't have households mixing with one another, and that's a massive impact. And frankly, the support, the grant support that's been provided by government hasn't gone far enough, in my opinion, to support those businesses. And listen, we have now
it's
got
just £1,000 that was announced today.
It's just £1,000 for those pubs that don't serve food, around just over £1,000 for pubs that do during the lockdown restrictions. And what that means, of course, is that we've got the vaccine, a number of vaccines right on the horizon now. We can see them in the near future, and we need to have hospitality venues open and supported, ready for that recovery. And my real concern is that there's going to be a number of businesses who simply will not make the recovery without the support. Now, some people are mixing that up with the measures around COVID. The reality is you can have both. You can have restrictions that bring down the infection rates, and if you have the business package support available for businesses to get them through the next few months. And that's where I think the government's going wrong, and that's just obviously my personal view.
Rishi Sunak, the Chancellor, gave a very bleak national UK-wide forecast for the economy. What about the local forecast? What do you think about that?
Well, things are really hard, aren't they? We've heard one of the anchor tenants in the shopping centre, Debenhams, going into liquidation. We know that the high streets, not just in Telford Wrekin, but across the country, were under huge pressure right before COVID anyway, and the impact upon all of this is making the high street more difficult. If you are in hospitality or a hotel, or you are a pub, then things weren't amazing before COVID, but we were starting to see a pickup of people getting out and about, and COVID has come along like a bus. But what we do need is the ability. Now we've got the vaccine on the horizon to just get through the next few months. And I was speaking to a number of pub owners only over the last couple of weeks, and what they say is the money they make normally in December is enough money to get them through January, February, into Easter. And that's why it's so critical that the government support the hospitality and leisure sectors together with the events industry, so that they are there for the recovery. Because my guess would be that once the vaccine comes, once we're through this, and we will get through this, there will be a huge urge amongst the community to come back together, because we've been away from each other for such a long time. There will be a huge demand on facilities and venues, so that people can come back together to meet with their friends and their family once more. And how sad it would be if a lot of those businesses simply aren't there to do that when we get to that point.
On to individual questions in relation to COVID then. This is from somebody who is shielding. Can I still have my bubble when I stop shielding? I live alone, they say.
Liz or Nick, you want to take this question?
Yeah, I'm happy to take that, Sean. Thank you. So yes, if you are a single adult living alone, you are able to form a linked bubble with another family. That family can make up of any numbers, but that should be an exclusive linked bubble. If I just go on to talk about some of the other bubbles that are mentioned by the government, we've all heard about the Christmas bubble. So the Christmas bubble can be up to 3 households, but it has to be an exclusive 3 households. If you formed a linked bubble with another household, you cast as 1 household. So if I give an example in my own family, so we've got a support bubble with my father-in-law. So we're classed as 1 household. My brother has got a support household with his mother-in-law, so they are 1 household. And then there's my mum and dad. So we could all come together at Christmas as a Christmas bubble between the 23rd and 27th. But obviously there's a lot of older people that I've mentioned in those bubbles, and I think from a public health perspective, what we all need to do is, when we are forming our bubbles over Christmas, is to just think about who we're forming with, and particularly protect the vulnerable in our community. There is also the linked childcare bubble. So these are bubbles that can form for the provision of childcare. So where you have got a family with a child aged 13 or under, you can link with another family for that childcare purposes. And that again must be an exclusive arrangement.
Can I also just say, Chris, it's a real difficulty, this one, and the number of households that we're allowed to join with is the maximum. It shouldn't be necessarily seen as the minimum. And one of the comments that the Chief Medical Officer made was around hugging and kissing grandparents, and his strong advice is don't. So I think it's just important to say that in that period, the virus doesn't care that it's Christmas. It doesn't care that you're having Christmas lunch with people that you haven't seen for a while. If you are infectious, well, and whether or not you know it, because we know around 70% of people don't show any symptoms, then it will pass. And if it passes to people who are vulnerable, the consequences are really, 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 really bad. So it's a real difficult one. But see the rules as the maximum, not the minimum. So as you approach the analogy that I was told the other week was as you approach a road, the speed limit might be 30 miles an hour, but if the conditions are bad, then you reduce your speed. You don't see the 30 as the minimum. And I think that's really important as we head towards Christmas.
And I can see Nikki and Liz in the background nodding there as well. You at home won't see because you're only seeing the person who's speaking because that's it's voice activated, and that's how it works. But I can see the others nodding in agreement. When the lockdown first happened, the council set up a voluntary dog walking service for those who are vulnerable. Is this happening this time round? And if not, how come?
So the answer is that the dog walking service was operated by volunteers. So if we've got volunteers that are still willing to do that, and there's still a need for that, then of course we'll match our volunteers to the resident that requires that service. We do know that the first lockdown was very different to the second lockdown. So for example, people who lived alone in the first lockdown were literally by themselves, whereas this time, or the time we're just leaving now, they were able to join another household. So the need did drop, but if there are particular families or residents who need that service, then please do get in touch and we'll see whether or not we can match you with one of our own staff or one of our volunteers to support you in that way.
Another technical question on COVID. During the second lockdown, the number to meet outside was 2, but it didn't include preschool aged children. Will this be the same for the rule of 6 when we move into a tier, or does the rule of 6 include preschool aged children?
So my understanding, Liz and Nikki, it does include those children. Yes, it does.
Yes, it does.
In England, it does. Yes.
Now, this question is all about the reporting of cases, or this is to do with cases at schools. Some schools have had many COVID cases, meaning some children have had to isolate multiple times. This person knows of 2 schools where a year group returned after isolating for 2 weeks, only to be told a few days later that they had to isolate again. So while there are plans for travellers to shorten their isolation time by taking a test after 1 week, is this something schools could start doing to minimise the time the children are out of school for?
So if Liz wants to come in terms of the testing element there.
So in terms of schools, so I do sympathise in terms of, yes, children are having to self-isolate and then repeat that self-isolation. What we are doing within the borough in certain schools where they've had a significant number of cases, and this has been the issue, we are advising the parents to get their children tested before the children return to school. So what we're trying to do there is pick up children without symptoms. There's also national pilots now taking place, not within our borough but elsewhere, for schools to do rapid testing. And we wait to hear the outcome of those pilots and indeed how they plan to deploy rapid testing in schools. And we will work as part of that in due course.
And now to the reporting of the numbers. Why are you publishing wards with the lowest testing? The questioner can see logic in showing the wards with the highest infection. Surely wards with lowest infection would be the sensible image to match. What does lowest testing actually tell us? Are you suggesting that people in those wards are acting irresponsibly?
No, I'm certainly not suggesting people are acting irresponsibly, Chris. What we're trying to do there is that if areas have low testing, especially when rates across the borough are fairly high, we aren't clear that people are coming forward to have testing, and therefore we're not picking up all the infections within that particular ward. And that's the real important thing, is that people come forward to get tested when they have symptoms, or as I've now suggested, as a precautionary measure if they have these other wider set of symptoms. So it's really important that we should target messages to areas of low testing in case that is the situation. In a sense, we monitor testing rates, we monitor positivity rates, and we monitor infection rates. It might be the case that areas with low infection rates, that is broadly right, but if their testing rate is low, I am concerned about that too. So it's trying to make sure enough people are coming forward to be tested.
Now, there was a huge reaction from the public when we first published on social media and on all our various channels the message for precautionary testing.
Yeah.
Whole variety of different things. Just a couple that spring to mind are, so you've basically got the symptoms of a cold. Does that mean that you have to go and have a test? And then there are those who are saying, I wanted to have a test and I couldn't get one.
So back in beginning of September, people did have trouble getting testing, but now testing is widely available, very accessible. And also now, what's different to now compared to beginning of September, is that infection rates are high, so our prevalence is high. So people are less likely to have COVID with these wider set of symptoms, but there will be some cases amongst them, and that is what we have found over the last week.
So it's a case of, if in doubt, get a test then, yeah?
Yeah.
Can I just add to that, Chris? It's really important that everybody looks at what happened in Liverpool and the experience in Liverpool. So one of the things that has really come out of Liverpool is that many people, either with no symptoms at all or very, very mild symptoms, or these precautionary symptoms that Liz has just spoke about, wouldn't go and get a test because they didn't think they had COVID, or they didn't know they had COVID because they had no symptoms at all. But when they were tested, in fact, they did have COVID. And just because they didn't have the symptoms doesn't mean they are any less infectious. They are infectious, and they will continue to infect people who then are showing symptoms. And what we have to do, and what's worked in Liverpool, is you identify where the virus is and you break the transmission. So if one person has the virus, you are able to isolate them. They then don't spread the virus to another 2 or 3 people who don't then go and spread it for another 2 or 3 people. So that's why you have to do it. And I saw social media comments about, you know, if more, we're encouraging more people get tested, therefore we'll show more positive cases, which will be bad for us as a borough. Actually, that isn't the case, because if we can find where they are, yes, our numbers will increase, but overall the numbers will reduce because we're able to isolate those people who've got it, and they're not wandering around the borough unintentionally and unknowingly spreading the symptoms. So I know it's really difficult, but that's the way that you break this virus down. You go hunting for it, you go and find it, you isolate it, and then you stop the spread. And that's the way we all get out of this, and the way that Liverpool did so successfully earlier this year.
I can see Nikki Minchell and Liz Noakes nodding through that. Do either of you want to add anything to that?
Not particularly, Sean. I mean, I think, you know, testing is one aspect of what we need to do, and it's very current at the moment. But all the issues around hands, face, and space, social distancing, no household mixing, there's lots. There's no one magic bullet, but we've got to try and tackle this virus in so many different ways, and testing is certainly one of them.
What do you think is going to happen after Christmas, after those 5 days?
Do you want me to cover that?
Anybody who wants to.
So I am concerned in terms of we probably will have a spike in the new year as people have relaxed over Christmas. So Sean's point earlier were really well made in terms of the household bubbles. The 3 household bubbles is the maximum, and you need to be careful in terms of social distancing within your 3 household bubbles, and think about who you are mixing with. And you know, you're mixing with your grandparents and your elderly aunts and uncles. They are far more vulnerable to this virus, and therefore it isn't we should really be careful around how we interact within those settings during that period, because undoubtedly I do expect there to be a spike. Our rates will not have fallen sufficiently by Christmas not to have a spike after Christmas.
Back to the questions on the data. Oh, sorry, Nikki, you were going to add.
Yeah, I was just going to say that in terms of the bubbles, what must be remembered as well, if anybody does show any of the symptoms, you should not form a bubble with anybody else. You must follow the normal guidance for self-isolation. We've already talked about the precautionary testing if you have symptoms that aren't the classic 3 symptoms. So I think, as Shaun and Liz have said, everybody should just exercise caution over that Christmas period, but you shouldn't form a bubble if you have symptoms of COVID.
So to the questions then about more to do with the data now that is published, can Telford and Wrekin Council take over the responsibility for all testing and data releases from the Shrewsbury and Telford Hospital Trust?
Well, the hospital trust isn't responsible for testing all the data. The data and the testing exclusively, all the sites in Telford and Wrekin, we work really hard to secure them, but they are all managed by Serco and other private companies on behalf of the government. So we don't have any control over the testing or data, and the data comes to us in glibs and glabs from regional partners. And I know there's a question later on about the accuracy of those figures, which we can go into in more detail. But unfortunately, this is not a local thing that we have any control over at all.
And actually, Shaun, you mentioned that. Let's bring that question in. And that question was in relation to every Thursday we put out the numbers and it's to do with the previous complete week. But then if you were to look at that week in a couple of weeks' time, the number will be different. Why is that?
Shall I cover that, Shaun?
Yeah.
So in terms of the numbers that we publish on a Thursday, there is always a bit of a time lag in terms of getting the data through and the results through. So that's why we publish on a Thursday for the previous week ending on the Sunday. So we still will get some cases coming through that would have been cases for the previous week come that Thursday. That's the first point to make. And the second point to make is that nationally they do revise the data. And what's happened particularly recently was that they revised the numbers going back till September because of the students and allocating students to their university town more fully than before, when sometimes students were allocated to where their parents lived or sometimes to the university town. So that retrospective data and change happened nationally and across all areas.
And
then eventually it's reflected in our figures then, yeah?
Yes.
Yeah, and also there are errors in the figures. Over recent weeks, we've seen a notification from the government that some previously identified positive cases actually weren't positive. They were void, and therefore we then have to reduce the numbers. But let me be very clear, one of the things that Liz, as the Director of Public Health, and we as a council have really majored on is our degree of transparency around this. So we long before many other councils were doing it, we were publishing our weekly numbers in a way that was easily identifiable, because it's really important you as residents understand what's going on here in our borough. So we can only use the data that's available to us. And as I said just previously, we're not responsible for the testing. We get this data from the government and we then present it to you in a way that we can all use usefully.
And so on the matter of transparency, why doesn't the council include the figures for non-COVID deaths in the region when announcing the tragic deaths following a positive COVID test? It would add context and better perspective.
So, I mean, I think what we try and publish is keeping it simple in terms of some of the key messages. So, yes, we publish the number of COVID deaths, but we certainly analyse the total number of deaths within the borough, and also the what you've seen in terms of excess deaths as well. But there's a time lag in terms of excess deaths in terms of understanding that picture. So, I mean, what I could say is that in November, we had 16 COVID deaths registered within the borough. So that is not just residents, that is people that have died within the borough, and 91 deaths in total registered within the borough. So we do have that information, but we do try and keep the messages and what we put on the infographic very simple and high level.
How much has the council, we talked about the finances, Councillor Shaun Davies, and you mentioned that there were there was more money coming in from government, which is helping but not eradicating the financial situation between now and the end of the financial year. But how much has the council now received from government?
Well, it's difficult to answer that question directly because there's pots of money that come to the council, and then we're responsible for getting that money out from the council into local businesses that never touch any council services or anything like that. There has been a number of grants that have been provided to the council, but as you say, Chris, quite rightly, is not filling the gap that we've got as a borough. We continue to lobby the government for further funding, and as I say, this is not a Labour council having a go at the Conservative government. If you speak to the Conservative-led local government association or many local Conservative council leaders across the region, their complaint is the same, that the money that councils as a whole is spending is not being made up or compensated. And we were made a very clear promise right at the start of this that all of our expenses would be fully reimbursed, and up until this point that hasn't happened.
And final question, well, actually not quite the final question, because we're going to save the best till the very, very end of this. So for the person who asked it, hang fire there, you know who you are. Why are you giving people £30 per child food vouchers and a breakfast box if a family has 5 children? That's £150 a week to feed them, and you still can't guarantee that those kids will get fed. The person asking this question says money better spent on educating parents to put kids first.
So firstly, the assertion's wrong. The money that's being provided by the government is for £30 per child to cover the Christmas 2 weeks. So it's not £30 per child per week. That's the first point. The second point is that we're seeing a significant number of people coming forward to claim free school meals because of parents either having their hours reduced, they're having their pay reduced. We've already spoken, haven't we, about a number of people losing their jobs because of the impact upon the economy, and maybe for the very first time claiming support. We're also seeing a number of parents who are in work claiming support. This provision is also not just for children on free school meals, but the support is available for armed forces children and looked after children. It's a wide gambit of support. Now, just to be clear as well, the support that we always we provide is always targeted, and it's always done on the basis of support. So it's not just the food or the voucher, it's also the support we do offer families. But can I just say that as somebody who received free school meals as a child, and both my mum and dad worked at the time, they just happened to be in relatively low pay, it is never the child's fault about what benefit and support the child receives. It's not their fault, and therefore let me just say that I wouldn't want to think that there's any child in Telford Wrekin going hungry this Christmas, and I'm sure that the questioner wouldn't either.
Thank you for the questions that are still continuing to come in. We have a handful of questions now, all related to COVID bubbles. An elderly couple who are both disabled required support. As far as I understand, the rules only a single person can create a support bubble with another household. I want to follow the guidance, but I'm not going to stop supporting people who need it. There's a dilemma.
Chris, what I didn't go into was all the different nuances of the support bubbles. The generalised accepted ruling is that it's one adult and another family, but there are situations, and one of them is one or more persons who have a disability who require continuous care on their own or together with another individual can link with the support bubble, so that there are leeways within the regulations to cater for our most vulnerable in society to ensure that they get the support that they need. If they've got any specific queries, then I suggest that what they do is they email into either coronavirus or into the Health Protection Hub for specific circumstances. We can answer those specific circumstances, but there are definitely leeways in the regulations that allow for the care of the vulnerable.
Okay, so those two email addresses then are coronavirus@telford.gov.uk and healthprotectionhub@telford.gov.uk. I've been in a bubble with a couple who are both disabled, and they've just come out of hospital after having a heart attack and a stroke. Can I still go and care for them now that we are going into tier 2, or have I just got to let them cope on their own?
I think referring to the previous answer, that they will be able to go and support that couple.
Why only single occupancy join another household bubble? Many elderly disabled couples need support, but the guidance does not allow, they say.
So I think, again, if a couple has a disability or requires support, you can form a support bubble, but elderly couples as living together, they can't form the support bubble with another family, but you can still go and give assistance. So if there are the exemptions, so if assistance is needed, you can go and support and give personal care. There's all of that is covered in the within the guidance. So I think these are quite specific circumstances, and what I'd urge people to do is to actually contact us, and we can talk to them and go through their specific circumstances.
So again, a reminder of those email addresses: coronavirus@telford.gov.uk and healthprotectionhub@telford.gov.uk. What support will there be for residents of all ages who live alone, who, for whatever reason, can't join a support bubble and who will find themselves alone over Christmas because they are obeying the social distancing restrictions?
So we've got a really fantastic community network of organisations and agencies and volunteers, and we'll be looking to mobilise those volunteers and match them to those people who are in need. And actually, can I just really praise the hospitality sector here in Telford Wrekin, who go above and beyond actually around Christmas time to reach out to those people who are socially isolated, not just around COVID times, but even before that. So if you are aware of a individual or a couple that fall into that bracket of being lonely or in need of support, then please drop me an email directly, shaun.davies@telford.gov.uk, and I'll be more than happy to match them with the supports available. There's a huge amount of support available. Often you don't know about it until you need it yourself, or you need it on behalf of your friends and family. But actually, can I just reassure you, there is a huge amount of support there, and we've got some fantastic community groups, organisations and volunteers who are ready, waiting this Christmas as they were last Christmas and the Christmas before that.
The next questioner lives in Telford. Their two daughters live in Burton-on-Trent. Can they go and visit them on Christmas Day because the questioner lives in Tier 2 and the daughters are in Tier 3 in Staffordshire?
Yes. Between the 23rd and 27th of December, you can travel between the tiers.
So in a couple of weeks' time then, this will be reviewed by government. What do you think is going to happen?
Well, I mean, I think one of the things I would say is we're talking on the basis that all this is going to happen, and I know the chances of it happening are really, really high. But the vote is actually in about 15 minutes' time in the House of Commons to decide formally on this. As I say, everyone thinks it will go through just fine. So we'll have to wait and see what happens in 14 days' time. If our numbers continue to plummet as they have been plummeting over the last couple of weeks, then let's see whether or not a tier 1 is available to us here in the borough. It's really important to say that actually as a borough we were consistently in tier 1 right up to and just before the second national lockdown. And if we get our numbers right down using that testing capacity, then the reward is that we will have less restrictions placed upon us. But that said, numbers go down, but numbers can also go up, and we've seen that happen over the last few weeks with numbers increasing significantly. And it's a bit like losing weight, I'm afraid. It's much easier to put on weight than it is to lose weight, and it's a bit like COVID numbers. It's very easy to start going up in numbers, very hard to reduce numbers. So we have all got that absolute common endeavour to work together to keep our numbers down. And you know, we are literally, I can't tell you, we are literally on the cusp of this vaccine being rolled out, and we are, as a council, we're supporting the plans for that. And I'm involved in the plans for that. We are literally on the cusp, and you know, falling at the last hurdle would be a real tragedy, wouldn't it? And we will see, as Nikki and Liz said earlier, we will see numbers grow because of Christmas week, and therefore we need to get our numbers right down beforehand. We'll see numbers go up, no doubt, because of more mixing, but we really do want to be in a position where we're back to tier 1. But as I say, really hard to predict the next few weeks, but we've all got to be vigilant. I was speaking to a consultant at the Royal Shrewsbury and Telford Hospital Trust this week, and let me say, I see it on the social media all the time, these deniers. Go and spend some time on a COVID ward and to see the impact of this virus. It's deadly. And let's not get into a situation where this Christmas we're hugging our loved ones for the last time. Let's just be sensible and work together.
Some business-related questions have just come through. One we've kind of answered, I think, already, which is whether the government has been in contact about financially supporting the council to cover the costs of dealing with COVID. But Shaun, what do you think, Shaun Davies, leader of Telford Wrekin Council, what do you think you might get, if anything, more between now and the end of the financial year to plug the £5 million or so that you still need to plug?
Well, we're working with all councils right across the country to present the case to government, to explain to them the losses that we're seeing, and we're asking them to help us support us in that. The spending review was a real opportunity for the government to do that, and as I say, they've built in this assumption that every council in the country will raise their council tax, including adult social care preset, by 5%. And in areas like ours, when the economy is on the on a downturn and people are really finding the cost of living an issue, 5% is a huge amount of money, even though we've got the lowest council tax in the West Midlands. So we do want to work together in order to avoid that. Listen, I'm not one to be unfair. The government have done a huge amount across the piece, but they just need to understand the impact upon councils, because it will be councils in local areas that will drive the economic recovery, working with our businesses, our voluntary sector, and so on. And we want to make sure we're in a stronger place as possible to lead that recovery locally with our community.
Couple of furlough questions and a very individual one. I was put on furlough over 4 bank holidays. The government paid 80%. The company I work for paid 20%. Am I still entitled to the bank holidays as holidays owned? Or owed?
That's a really niche question that we probably need to employ some employment solicitors for. My understanding on the broad principle is that when you're on furlough, you still accrue holiday entitlement on even though you're not working. In terms of the bank holiday, if you work it and you're normally paid, you would just only be paid. You wouldn't receive the bank holiday as well. So I think it would all come back down to contract of employments, and probably the citizen advice is probably the point of call that you would need to go to and have a chat with them. That's a very niche question, what I can say. I don't know if Sophie, I'll put Sophie on the spot. I don't know if Sophie knows.
Sophie shaking her head. No, okay. As a small employer, asking about an update on the furlough scheme. Still waiting for authorisation via the Gateway Shropshire Chamber for over 2 months, and they haven't heard anything either.
So again, I don't know the specifics around this. As a council, we're not involved at all in the furlough system. So if you want to drop me an email, and I'll look to support your signposting to a direction of support. But the furlough is broadly open until the end of March, and will be reviewed in January. There was some cut-off points in terms of applying to put workers on the furlough system. But again, if you want to come back to me, I'll try and support you in any way we can. But as a council, we have no involvement in the furlough scheme.
And there's a further question that's almost word for word the same, but asking about the Kickstart scheme. So email Shaun Davies, that's shaun.davies@telford.gov.uk. Having a business premises in Dorley, I have a concern about the Terrace Lodge and the problems with antisocial behaviour daily, with our emergency services being called there daily. I'm worried that it will damage our business. What can I do apart from reporting everything that happens there?
Please do continue to report concerns of any antisocial behaviour in any location or property. It is a police matter, but what I can say is that we are working very closely with the police in regards to particular concerns, and that's a multi-agency. But please do continue to report it. When I speak to the police, they always say, well, there's not been many reports about that in this area. We've got more logged here, so actually reporting them again really helps our case.
We'll carry on for 10 minutes maximum, see us through to about 7 o'clock this evening. Thank you for still putting questions through to the conversation on Facebook, and they are being fed through to us. And here are the next couple. Can we swap traffic lights on roundabouts near town for trees?
No, we can't. I mean, I think, you know, flipping question, flipping answer. I mean, I think we've got some fantastic facilities, but we do need to keep the traffic going and flowing. And what we've done, serious answer to the question, we've invested significantly in responsive traffic lights now. So you don't have these old style traffic lights where they're based on a time. There's some sensors in the road, they react, they're interactive. You know, what's a couple of seconds some traffic lights in order to allow another car to go past you, or somebody to cross the road. You know, given the year that we've just had, I think that really is a first world problem.
Is there a way to request a visit from the parking enforcement team to my local area?
Yeah, if you want to email the council, contact telford.gov.uk, that can be fed through. Otherwise, contact your local ward member who can feed any concerns into the enforcement team.
But will that guarantee a visit?
I think they can
can't be
also
everywhere, can they?
They can report using the My Telford app as well, Chris.
Yeah, any concerns like that, we'll have a look at it. Clearly, the enforcement team can't be in every place all of the time, but if there is a particular hotspot, we're more than happy to send some of our teams out to check that out. And we're also working with our parish and town councils over the next few months to look at community action teams and trying to bolster our enforcement presence as well. But as going back to a question from earlier on, it's not just about the enforcement. Sometimes it just needs there needs to be a solution for the problem. For example, additional car parking. And as I said, we're also investing in extra estate parking too.
Going back to COVID, are we allowed to meet people in our gardens at home if we social distance? But the key point of this question is they don't have a back gate, so they'd have to walk through the house. I think we had this in the spring, didn't we?
Yeah. So the rule of 6 would apply, Chris. So because that applies even in our private gardens, so it couldn't be more than 6 people from different households. I think if they've got to walk through the house to get to the back garden, then that would have to be done very, very carefully. And people would need to be wearing, I would suggest, wear face coverings as they walked through the house, and that they didn't touch anything in that transition from the front door to the back door. But again, any kind of meeting up with people outside of your household must be done with caution. And I think what the caller should understand is that rule of 6 applies, so they can't meet indoors. We're in tier 2, we can't meet people indoors. It would have to be in an outdoor space.
A wider health question, what's the mortality rate for Telford and Rekin?
Okay.
Go on, Liz.
So I haven't got the mortality rate for Telford and Rekin to hand, but in a sense what we tend to look at is an age standardised mortality rate, because every area's mortality rate will vary according to how many older people you have. So we do adjust for that. So that's not something I have to hand.
Fair enough.
But in terms of, can I just say, Chris, I don't know whether the question was around the mortality rate around COVID particularly, or whether general COVID.
The entire question, I only read the first half of the question, but the entire question is, what's the mortality rate for Telford and Rekin? Have any autopsies been done to verify deaths?
So if this is in regards to COVID, then people who are tested, who test positive for COVID within a 28-day period, count towards the COVID deaths. However, there's another way to look at this question, is to look at the Office of National Statistics data on excess deaths, and the ONS provides a graph which shows the normal rate of deaths that you would expect in any one year in any one area, and then provide the excess. In other words, the above average, and you can cross compare. But I don't know whether, obviously, I don't know where the question is coming from this, but there are some, and I read this on social media from time to time. There are some people who suggest that COVID deaths just aren't happening. It's absolutely wrong. Members of my family have died from COVID-19. Many people in this borough have died from COVID-19, and that it's a fact. And we will, as a council, really be robust around this, because it's really important that people understand how serious COVID-19 is to the health and safety of our population here.
Thank you very much to everyone for watching. Thank you very much indeed for all the questions that you've fired at us, both in advance and whilst we've been speaking this evening. And just to prove that we do genuinely look at all the questions and we do submit them as well, here's the last one, and it genuinely has come in. Who would win in a fight, Wonder Woman or the Pink Power Ranger? I had to look up the latter.
Well, see,
There's a generational thing.
thing. So on the basis of my own watching as a child, I will go with the Pink Power Ranger.
See, I remember Wonder Woman, but I don't remember the Pink Power Ranger. But then that's my age.
I'd go Wonder Woman.
I would go Wonder Woman, but I think it is a generation thing.
I would too, I'm afraid. I've never heard of the Pink Power Ranger.
Oh, shocking. You don't know what you missed.
There you are. Looks like it's the Wonder Woman that's going to win it. To Nikki Minshall, to Liz Noakes, to Sophie Lane, and to Councillor Shaun Davies, thank you very much indeed. Thank you for watching. Stay safe. Goodbye.
Bye.